Governor Christie has arrived, and we're thrilled he's here, and we're going to begin our program with remarks from our esteemed Board President, Dr. Anthony DeFabio. Dr. DeFabio?
I'll definitely take esteemed, and I know people have traveled far and wide to hear these remarks I'm going to make, so I want to make sure I can be as inspiring as possible. But it really is a true honor and privilege to welcome all of you here on behalf of the entire Board of Directors of NJAMA. This is a big day, not just because we have Governor Christie here, and quite honestly, even though it's an open house, it's not because we're opening our doors to you. I think more than anything else, this is an opportunity for us to open our hearts to you, because in my opinion, and I think in that of the board and our NJAMA membership, the power of NJAMA is never going to be found in bricks and mortar. The power of NJAMA is going to be found in the conviction, the passion, and the purpose that our organizations and that our members bring to bear every day as we try and champion, the plights of some of our most vulnerable, those that are struggling with mental health and addiction challenges. And so today I just want to take a moment to really say something that I think for me characterizes the governor and what has been, I think, an incredible, tenure as governor generally, but really what has been incredibly inspirational last year. And it reminds me of a quote that Carl Jung put out there. And the quote was, "Your vision will become clear when you look in your heart. When you look outside, you dream. When you look inside, you awaken." And I think the last year, what has been awoken within our communities, nationally, not just New Jersey, the level of intense focus and commitment, the passion and resolve that has come to bear to be able to try and put a dent and save the lives of those that are struggling with addiction generally, but certainly our opioid epidemic, is something that has left me feeling incredibly inspired. And I think that that's an important thing, because I don't think it's enough for our communities to know that we're simply thought leaders, that we're incredibly bright, hard-working, dedicated individuals. I think they need to expect that we're going to be bringing cutting-edge treatments and services. I think they need to know that that's going to happen, that we're going to bridge that research-practice divide, that we're going to figure out where we can high-tech and high-touch so we can be as smart-working as we are hard-working. But most importantly, I think there's nothing more powerful than being vulnerable and being passionate and being authentic with them as they're going through their own journey. All the trials and tribulations that might characterize it never takes away from the fact that they're people. We're all people first. And it's the humanity and the compassionate care that you've brought to bear, I think, within the last several months in particular. I think your whole tenure, but really, truly within the last several months, has just left a lot of us just feeling deeply inspired and incredibly invigorated, and probably even more committed than ever before to really just go ahead and put an end to this incredible epidemic of opioid addiction that's just affecting all of our communities and is affecting all of our families, including my own. And so I just wanted to welcome everyone. I know we have Commissioner Rinn here. Thank you so much for being here. I know we have Senator Thompson here. Thank you for being here. I know we had other dignitaries earlier in the day, and I couldn't be more appreciative that they came here. But I also couldn't be more inspired and appreciative that all of you are here. So thank you for that. And I just want to go ahead and have Deb Wentz, our president, come back up. I know I missed some people. She'll probably do some corrections because I always leave collateral damage when I speak. That's never happened to you. No. It's never happened to you at all, ever. No. But we have Deborah Wentz come up here. But thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I think you said it all, and it does start with where our heart is that drives the work that we do. So I will be the more official person, just give you a quick overview of NJAMA and to welcome you. I'm so pleased to see here today many of our former and current board members, dignitaries. I'm afraid if I start mentioning everyone that I'll miss someone. Every once in a while that happens. So I am just going to say, because you are people first, I am so thrilled to see all of you here today. And while we've changed addresses many times and experienced numerous changes over the years in our field of mental health and substance use, one thing has always remained the same, which is our leadership role in advocating on behalf of community providers and the 500,000 children and adults that they represent. So I want to jump, because my remarks about why we are recognizing your work today, Governor Christie, are, I've cut them in half, I've cut them then down again, but you have done so much that I could not cut them further. So I think maybe you could just sit back and enjoy that we really didn't miss what you did and that we are grateful. So beginning with Governor Christie's work with Daytop Village in 1995, and as a Morris County freeholder, he has always been a true champion for individuals who are struggling to overcome addictions and for their families. He has been a strong, consistent voice in fighting stigma as he repeatedly identified addiction as an illness that deserves to be treated as readily as any other illness. Governor Christie has demonstrated his commitment again and again with legislation and funding for expansion of services as well as for new initiatives. Out of respect for the governor's time, I cannot tell them all, but so many are so notable that we still have quite a list. In 2012, the governor began transitioning the state's drug courts from voluntary to mandatory programs with substantial funding accompanying each phase of implementation. The following year, the governor implemented training for police officers and first responders to administer the antidote Narcan to overdose victims, a program that has saved tens of thousands of lives. He also established the Facing Addiction Task Force that developed many recommendations that would become law in subsequent years. In 2015, a package of 21 substance use treatment-related bills were introduced. Governor Christie signed half of these bills into law later that year, and many others since. They allowed individuals receiving medication-assisted treatment to enroll in drug court, establish recovery housing programs at four-year public colleges and universities, and launch the Recovery Coaches Program. And the groundbreaking One-Stop Reentry Program was also founded. In 2016, Governor Christie made an historic financial commitment to increase mental health and substance use treatment rates. He also expanded the Recovery Coach Program, the first of several times that would occur. The New Jersey Prescription Monitoring Program Interstate Data Sharing Program was expanded once again to include a seventh state, New York. And behavioral health homes were expanded that year too. Many more other initiatives took off in 2016, including the First Responder Recovery Program, making law enforcement officers a point of access for help and recovery. And our governor did not slow down in 2017. In fact, he speeded up and funding, legislation, and new initiatives abounded, starting with a hotline and statewide marketing campaign to encourage people to seek help, and the establishment of the governor's task force on drug abuse control. Treatment access for 18 and 19-year-olds and the Pediatric Behavioral Health Collaborative were all expanded. Initial prescriptions for opioids were limited, and a guarantee of insurance coverage ensuring immediate access to substance use treatment was signed into law. And that one was so groundbreaking, and I never saw anything like it. Even I, couldn't believe it, but was thrilled. And in April 2017, we saw the Mid-State Correctional Facility reopened as a drug treatment center for inmates. There's so much more, and An unprecedented investment of $200 million for more than 20 initiatives focusing on prevention, treatment, and recovery came in September, including residential treatment for pregnant women and new mothers, and funding to increase availability of medication-assisted treatment. In October, legislation was signed that allows all pharmacies to sell the Narcan antidote without a prescription. Along the way, Governor Christie had signed a Good Samaritan bill, too, that protects people from prosecution when calling 911 about an overdose. And nothing has saved more lives, I think, than that, because it took the fear out of reaching out for help. In 2017, he also authorized first responders to carry increased amounts of Narcan to better counteract the deadly effects of fentanyl. This was just one of 40 task force recommendations, which also made their way to the President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis, which Governor Christie chaired, and as we all know, we're so proud of him. Through all of this work, the governor has reached across party lines to fight the epidemic in New Jersey and nationally, underscoring the fact that the opioid epidemic knows no political boundaries and does not discriminate. This fight has never been part of a political agenda for Governor Christie, but a personal commitment, one that the governor said he's determined to continue after his term ends. And in our eyes, fighting the opioid epidemic will be Governor Christie's greatest legacy. And for that reason, and many others, we are pleased and proud to recognize you, Governor Christie, for your outstanding leadership and compassion in addressing the opioid crisis. Oh, Art wants to get a picture.
Yeah, all right.
Wait.
Can I sneak in too?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. It's always great when you come to a place you leave with hardware. That's really good. Although at this point, I will tell you, as I'm starting to try to pack up, with 39 days to go, Mary Pat came to visit my office yesterday, and there's lots of stuff now laying around. And she's like, you don't think you're coming home with this stuff, do you? So we're now in a significant debate about what to do with all the things that you collect over 8 years as being governor. So when you're thinking about things this weekend, maybe if you even take a couple of moments to say a prayer, include in your prayers my negotiations with my wife over what to do with all the things that I've been able to collect. I want to thank Deborah so much for this award today, for her wonderful remarks, but more importantly for being a partner over the last number of years of my governorship in speaking out clearly on behalf of those both who are suffering from this disease and their families who suffer along with them and work hard every day to try to make sure that their loved ones are taken care of. I want to thank Commissioner Wynn for being here today and for his leadership at the Department of Health, and I want to thank Senator Thompson for being here as well. He's also someone who has cared deeply about this issue and continues to, and I'm assured that as I leave and Sam stays, that he'll continue to be a voice in the state capitol for issues like this one. I'll just say this about this issue. As Deborah talked about, this has been something that I've cared deeply about for the last 22 years. And it's not something that you campaign on. It's not political. It is personal. And I've often thought that in the midst of campaigns that it's not something to talk all that much about. It's something that when you get into office and have the privilege of being in office, you just start doing. And you let your actions speak for you in terms of why this is such a big priority and why it's so important to families across the state and across the country. We know that too many people are dying each and every day. We see it in our newspapers. We feel it in our churches and our synagogues. We see it happening in our neighborhoods. And we know that this disease is absolutely agnostic as to politics, as to educational background, as to economic status, as to race or religion, as to gender. This disease will take all comers. However this disease finds you, it will take you. And it will be happy to take you as quickly as it possibly can. That's why we've limited opioid prescriptions initially to 5 days, because we know that all it takes is 5 to 7 days, and sometimes less, for people to be on these drugs and become wildly addicted, especially if there's a predisposition in their family background to this type of problem. We've done all the other things that Deborah talked about because they're needed. There's not going to be one thing that's going to solve this problem, because each human being is different and unique, and we know that we're going to need to take different approaches with folks. But what I'm for are these things. I'm for evidence-based treatment. Evidence-based treatment that we know will work over the course of time. I'm for medication-assisted treatment because we know that can work as well, and I'm for expanding the options in medication-assisted treatment. I'm for making sure that when someone picks up the phone and calls and makes the decision that they want to leave a life of addiction and move towards a life of recovery, that they have the opportunity to get the treatment that they need, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, to be able to get the help that they need. I want to make sure that families understand that asking for help is not only the smart thing to do, it's the right thing to do. I want families to understand that the disease is no more a reflection upon their family and their family's values than is diabetes or cancer or heart disease. We don't judge families based upon whether or not members of their family contract those diseases. Yet, with this disease, we know that we do judge, that many in our society judge. And the reason we know that is we're talking to the victims of the disease themselves. Every time I've gone to a treatment center over the last 22 years, when I get to talk to people who are in the throes of addiction moving towards recovery, what they always say to me invariably is, Governor, I come from a good family. And my response now in the last few years has always been, why would you think I would think otherwise? But people do. I think the single most important thing we can do to begin to combat this addiction effectively over the long term is to remove that stigma, is to have families stop being embarrassed to talk about a loved one of theirs who's in the midst of this disease, to stop families from hiding and those individuals from hiding from the help that they need to get themselves on a better road. And we know that much of the reluctance towards treatment is for that very reason. I use the analogy all the time, and I'll use it again today. My mother was an addict. She was addicted to nicotine. She smoked from the time she was 16 years old till what seemed to us to be almost unavoidably. She was diagnosed with lung cancer 55 years later at 71. And when she was diagnosed with lung cancer, nobody said to me, well, she knew what she was doing. She's getting what she deserved. No one said that. All the people who found out about it came to me and said, here's some doctors you should consider. Here's some treatments that worked for a friend or a loved one of mine. We're praying for her. Can we come to visit her? Can we comfort her? And I wasn't ashamed to tell people that my mother was a smoker who was suffering from lung cancer, because I didn't think that it reflected upon her morality, and I knew it didn't reflect on mine, or my dad's, or my brothers or sisters. But I wonder, and I want you to think, if you have someone similar in your own life, would I have reacted the same way if instead of nicotine it was heroin? Would I have been willing to call a neighbor or a friend and say, hey, my mom's a heroin addict. Do you have any experience with that? And do you have any doctors or treatment centers that you think are particularly good? To be able to ask people to come and comfort her and pray for her because she was in the throes of this disease. Fact is, I don't think I would have, because of the stigma that attaches to this disease. It is central. It is central to the awful nature of this disease that we're afraid to talk about it. The same thing goes for other mental health issues. Somehow we think that reflects upon us. I want to turn this around so that it does reflect upon us if we don't ask for help, if we don't talk about it, that then we seem uncaring, unfeeling, ignorant, because we won't discuss it. That's where we need to turn our society around to. And I believe we can. And I know that I'm here today at Najama preaching to the converted. If you're in this room today, you don't need me to convince you of this. Remember, years ago, my wife is number 9 of 10 children, which means I have relatives everywhere. One of the places I have them is in upstate New York, and we went to visit those relatives, and my sister-in-law is a Lutheran, and she took me to Lutheran services, which we had never been to before as Catholics. So we went to Lutheran services, and that day, the minister's sermon was on preaching to the choir. Now, all of us who hear the phrase, you're preaching to the choir, always hear it used as it being a waste of time. You're preaching to the choir. Well, this day, I finally understood what preaching to the choir really meant. His whole sermon was on preaching to the choir. And he ended it by saying, I am preaching to the choir. I plead guilty to preaching to the choir. My career is built on preaching to the choir. He said, but I preach to the choir so they'll sing. And I sat there in one of those pews and said, I finally get it. And I said, this is really good. I'm going to steal it and use it. So, with all respect to the Lutheran minister whose name I cannot remember, because I was only there once, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm preaching to the choir so you'll sing. See, in the end, the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s was ended when the families of those who were suffering joined with their friends and neighbors to march on state capitals and the national capital and say, it is unacceptable that this disease is allowed to indiscriminately kill our loved ones. And we want the government and private sector to partner together to come up with treatments to turn this from a deadly disease to a chronic disease. And it was when people like Ryan White and people like Magic Johnson turned up with AIDS that our society's attitude changed. And that's when people started to march. And once people started to march, then they were no longer hiding in the shadows. And once they were no longer hiding in the shadows, they could no longer be ignored. And once a problem in our country goes from being ignored to being attended to, no country in the history of the world has ever been better at solving the problems that affect the human condition than the United States. So the preaching I'm doing today is to tell you this: if these marches are going to happen, they are going to be led by the people in this room. It's your responsibility, because you already understand this. Leaders educate. Whenever anybody asks me about polls, I always say to them, my job is not to follow polls, my job is to change them. Unless they agree with me. Then I quickly get out in front of a parade that's already started marching and claim leadership. But if they're against you, your job is to change them. Your job is to change attitudes. And then to encourage people that the only thing that will change this is when the families and friends of the people who are suffering are no longer willing to tolerate that suffering. It happened with the AIDS epidemic, and it can happen here too. We know that the solutions are there. We just have to be strong enough and resolute enough to demand that they be made available broadly to as many people as need them. You know, when I was running for president, one answer to one question that I gave in a town hall meeting became incredibly noteworthy across the country. I can tell you when I was giving that answer that night, it's an answer that I've given inside the state 100 times. And one that I'd given on the campaign trail for president any number of times. When I go back and look at it even now, it seems to me to be completely unremarkable. Except when I scroll down on YouTube to see that it's now gotten 15 million hits. And I figure, even I must have come up with something that was noteworthy. 15 million people have listened to it. But if you go back and listen to that answer, it's nothing different than what you already know. Talking about a dear friend of mine who had everything to live for, who had every measure of success that American society can give. Fabulously well educated, incredibly successful at his business, which was the practice of law, an extraordinarily loving, beautiful, and successful wife, 3 extraordinary young daughters, a beautiful home in the New Jersey suburbs, a great car to take him back and forth to work every day, and no significant worries about how to pay the bills or put food on the table. The youngest one of his law school classmates to become a partner, an editor of the Law Review, and most annoying to his other very close friends, myself included, the best looking one of all of us by far, and in the best shape as well. A completely annoying human being. In every respect. And one of his annoying traits was the fact that he kept in great shape by running dozens of miles every month, well into his mid-40s. And he was obsessive about it. And one of those days, running on the streets of Basking Ridge, he stepped into a pothole while not paying attention and changing the music on his iPhone, and hurt his back. And it wouldn't get better after a few days, so he went to the doctor, and the doctor said to him, listen, we'll get some chiropractic care for you, you'll get some other help, but in the meantime, just so you can function and go to work, we'll give you some Percocet to deal with the pain. He was 42 years old. In the next 10 years of his life, he was divorced, kicked out of his home, was barred by the courts from seeing his children, lost his license to practice law, lost his car, lost his license to drive, lost a second home that he had bought for himself, and was in and out of rehabilitation centers over 10 years at least a dozen times. Suffered through interventions by me and his other friends from law school who cared about him deeply and only wanted to help him. And we lived with the frustration of watching a life slipping away right before our eyes, and the helplessness that you feel when everything you try seems to fail. And then inevitably, that call comes on an early Sunday morning that you've been dreading for a long time. And it was that your friend at 52 years old was found in a motel room in West Orange, New Jersey, with an empty bottle of Percocet and an empty quart of vodka, by himself, dead. He died alone. with just his drugs and his alcohol. By every measure we have in this country, he was a successful person. Great parents, great spouse, great children, great job, great education, great health. And this disease took him. There but for the grace of God go I. There but for the grace of God go I. And as governor of New Jersey, I sat at his funeral and watched his ex-wife and his 3 daughters sob in the pew next to me, blaming themselves because they couldn't save him. I don't know how to define human suffering. It is sometimes beyond human comprehension. But I knew what it was that day. And I knew that in the years that I had left as governor, despite all the efforts I had made so far, that I had lost him. And I needed to redouble my efforts even more to try to make sure that not another spouse and another set of young children would go through the same pain and loss that they did. I know there are people in this room today who know exactly what I'm talking about, and who know, both as a loved one and a friend, what that feels like. That's what drives me to do this. Not just that my friend was lost, but that I knew from watching him and from being in this job that there are thousands more like him every week, and that's just unacceptable in the greatest country that the world's ever known. It's unacceptable in the richest country the world has ever seen. It's unacceptable in a country that has compassion for every human rights violation all around the world, and that we send our men and women to protect the human rights of others. It is time to protect the human rights of those who are here. We're the greatest country in the world because we were founded on 3 things. Life. The preciousness of life. Think about the fact that our founding document used as its foundational words 3 inalienable rights. First one being life. That a government, that a people acknowledged life as something that everyone on this earth has an inalienable right to pursue as they see fit. Liberty. The freedom of choice that God gives to every human being, but that at times governments, tyrants take away. Liberty. The second principle upon which our country was founded. Now those are great 2 principles, but they don't make us a lot different than some other countries in the history of the world that have also talked about life and liberty being very important. It's the 3rd one that makes America the most unique place the world has ever seen. Our founder said 3 inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No other country in the history of the world has ever been founded on the principle that each one of its citizens has the inalienable right to pursue happiness as they define it. We cannot do that if we are under a cloud that's created by this disease. My friend had great happiness for much of the first 42 years of his life. And the last 10, his happiness was snuffed out by the cloud of this disease. It is contrary to what this country stands for to allow this to continue. And so every leader in every position in this country has an obligation, in my view, to do what they can do to help turn it around. That includes all you too. Because if you're in this room, you're a leader of this movement. If you're here because you've decided you have something valuable to say, to give, to contribute. That day sitting in that funeral, I decided that the good things I had been contributing for the last 15 years had been good but not good enough. So I spent the last 7 doing more. And I hope all of you do too. You never know, most of the time, the families that you'll help. But just know that you will. And I leave the governorship in 39 days completely confident that this portion of our work will and has changed lives. When you run for a job like this, all you ever ask for, if you really are going for it for the right reasons, is not to be loved all the time, but it is to do work of consequence. See, because work of consequence can be loved and hated. Work of consequence can be admired and despised. That's the standard we should hold ourselves to. This is work of consequence. And we will have detractors who will say to us that this is a moral failing and that these people are getting what they deserve for their bad choices. Whenever anybody says that to you, I suggest you, because it works great for me all the time. So this is really, focus group tested by me running around to all these different groups all over the country. And it's said to me all the time. It was said to me when I lowered the flags to half staff in New Jersey for Whitney Houston. I had someone come up to me and say, how could you lower the American flag for a crack addict who wasted her life? And this is when I first came up with doing this. And Gary Lanigan is here as my corrections commissioner. He knows that the best things I come up with are the things that I come up with right off the top of my head. And then all of a sudden I realize it works, and I go, okay, we'll keep repeating this. But this guy came up to me and said, a crack addict, you lowered my flag for a crack addict. And I looked at him and I said, oh, I understand your concern, sir, because I'm certain you've never made a mistake in your life, right? Just looked at me and I said, no, I'd like you to tell me. I'm asking. Have you never made a mistake in your life? He goes, well, it's ridiculous. Of course I have. I go, oh. I said, so now we're just talking about what kind of mistake. See, you're lucky, because the mistake you made, you could take back. The mistake she made, because of who she was and what her genetic background was and her mental makeup, she couldn't take back. And it killed her. So you both made mistakes. But you survived your mistake, and she didn't. I said, God bless you. I'm sure that you're so grateful to God that your mistake wasn't deadly. And given that you're so grateful, I'm sure you won't say anything bad about her again. And I tell you, it was great. He didn't know what the hell to say. Just kind of stared at me, and I said, good seeing you. Because, when you stand well, get out, right? I want to see you. Confront these bigots, because that's what they are. The same kind of bigots as bigots who make decisions based upon race and gender and color and ethnic background. The same types of bigots who make a decision about your moral standing based upon mistakes that you may have made. That's when we'll turn this around. I hope all of you will confront those folks. Confronting that is sometimes uncomfortable, but I can guarantee you, having done it a bunch of times, it's always satisfying. And anyway, we're from New Jersey. If we don't do it, who the hell will? So I'm so pleased to be here today. And I'm sure, I don't know what Deborah thought 8 years ago. Never asked her this. I'm not asking you now. I don't know what she thought 8 years ago when I first showed up. And I don't know if she thought 8 years ago when I showed up, she thought to herself, in 8 years we'll be giving this guy an award, because we are so in sync in terms of the things that we think are important to try to turn around the lives of people in need in this state. She may have been thinking it. I can tell you I wasn't. This has been an extraordinary journey. And I have picked up extraordinary allies along the way. People who have already been working on the problem even more earnestly than I was, and others who have joined the cause anew. But I leave this job feeling very comfortable that we together, not me, we together have begun to inspire a movement in this state that now has enough momentum that's going to be very, very difficult for anyone else to ignore. And you deserve great credit for that, each and every one of you in this room. And I'm glad to have been a part of that effort for the last 8 years. As Deborah said in her remarks, I'll continue to be a part of it as we go forward after I leave this job. And every life that we save is fulfilling God's mission. President Kennedy said in one of his later speeches in his life that being a public servant, you must always think that your actions should indeed make God's work here on earth our own. This is making God's work on earth our own. You should all be proud, and I'm proud to be honored by all of you, and I'm proud to be here today, and I'm proud to continue to work with you as we go ahead in the future. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Deborah. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. I thought you liked me. You really want me to go to Washington? Good Lord. Thank you.
She comes from.
You're welcome.
Bill.